Now we're going to go back live to Washington, D.C. and Anne-Marie Mediwake. Hey, Anne-Marie.
Hey, Teddy, thanks so much. Listen, we know that there are 50 states, but only 7 may ultimately decide who becomes the next president. If the polls are accurate, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are virtually tied in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina. Those are the so-called battleground states that could tip this election. The other states, you can see by this map here, are historically either Democratic or Republican. So to help us break down how each of these states could vote and what that would mean for each candidate is CTV political analyst Eric Ham. I'm used to talking to you remotely, so it's great to now be like, right half a foot apart. Yeah. Welcome to your morning, and great to have you here. White House is in the background. You and I bumped into each other on the street yesterday. Mm-hmm. We were both doing some work, and I asked you then how you were feeling, and your answer surprised me. You said you didn't know. So how are you feeling this morning?
I still don't know. And when you mentioned those 7 battleground states, I think there could be another state that's in play that's not a traditional battleground state, and that's the state of Iowa. Mm-hmm. Because now we're hearing that Kamala Harris is leading there. And also, if you look at the early vote totals, we're saying that that race is also tied. So could that be another state that's in play, a traditional red state that is typically not a battleground state, that now looks like Kamala Harris is gaining some momentum in?
How do you think the Republican Party was reacting to that this morning?
Well, I think they are deeply worried about this race because what we're seeing, at least in the final days of the race, is that that Kamala Harris has growing momentum, and a lot of these late voters are now beginning to shift towards Kamala Harris. And so the question is, will she continue to ride that momentum, especially into Election Day, where we know millions of people are going to the polls today?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the number 270, which for our Canadian audience is the number that you need to remember tonight. That's what a candidate needs to win the presidency. That's the amount of Electoral College votes. If, Eric, all the other states vote as expected, that means Kamala Harris would need to pick up 45 of these Electoral College votes. Donald Trump, by contrast, would need just 51. And as you said, the polling averages show that neither candidate is leading by more than 2 points in any of those 7 key battleground states. So what does Trump or Harris need to do to have those states to ensure their victory?
Well, Kamala Harris just needs 3. She just needs to win Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and she's president of the United States. Donald Trump needs to be able to flip one of those blue states. And if he cannot flip one of those states, then this race is over for him. And so that's what he needs to be able to do. Now, polls are showing one thing. But early voting is showing something totally different. In fact, in Pennsylvania right now, early voting is showing that at least Democrats are outpacing Republicans by more than 20 points, 24 points. That's a big spread, particularly when you look at polls that are showing a tight race. The question is, can Republicans on today actually catch up to Democrats? Now, we know already Republicans have increased their early vote total by 30%. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if there is enough room for them to actually be able to swing those 3 states. Also, we got to look at what independent voters are doing. Yeah. In Wisconsin, it's very strange because right now what we're seeing is independents are actually outpacing Democrats and Republicans in early voting.
So you could have some split voting happening.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Nebraska. We talked about Iowa, we've talked about Pennsylvania and the importance that it is because it has the most electoral college votes, 19 of those 7 states. But Nebraska is interesting because it is mostly red, but it's got that little blue dot. Mm-hmm. So how could that little blue dot influence this election?
Well, because again, we're talking about 270, and many are thinking like, what happens if this is a tie? And it's that little blue dot. That's only one electoral college vote. But if you're looking at a race that's expected to be so razor thin, every vote, including every single electoral college vote counts. That's why now Iowa is looking like it could be really, really important in how it shapes the race.
What are you watching tonight? Pennsylvania, obviously. Iowa, you've mentioned.
No, actually, I'm focusing on North Carolina.
Okay, tell me.
Yeah, and the reason why is because North Carolina has always been a state that's been broken down by 33% Republican, Democrat, and Independent. And just yesterday, we saw that in North Carolina, independents are actually outpacing both Democrats and Republicans in early voting in that state. We know Mark Robinson, the gubernatorial candidate, Republican, we know he's had his scandals, and we know that Democrats early on thought that this was a state they could pick up. And so I'm watching that state to see where those independent voters who are now outpacing Democrats and Republicans, where are they actually voting and how are those votes actually breaking, especially lately? Are they breaking for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
Have we seen a switch at all in voting patterns? You know, people traditionally voting one way or a voting bloc voting one way, and now they've started to shift some of their support.
Yes, we have. Actually, with Latinos, we know that they overwhelmingly support Democrats, but what we have been seeing, at least in polling data, is that Donald Trump has been very, very successful with peeling off some of those Latino men. And the question is, will that actually continue to happen, especially in light of some of the comments that we've heard from supporters of Donald Trump?
All right, you watched both those speeches last night. Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania. We watched Donald Trump. He finished in Michigan like he did in 2016. What was your takeaway from those speeches last night?
It's interesting because I thought Kamala Harris's speech really stood out because I think over the last few days, I think we've seen both of the candidates really go negative, and I think it's looked more and more like a race to the bottom, which is, I think, a complete shift for the Harris campaign, who at the convention was all about joy. And I think last night she went back to that message, I thought, which was very striking.
All right, the rest, as we say, is going to be history. We will have to wait and see. Eric Ham, great to have your perspective this morning, giving Canadians a really good sense of what we need to be watching for as we watch this election play out through the day, in the night, and then the next couple of days. Hopefully tonight. Thanks a lot, Eric. You had a long day, by the way. So you started at 6:30 this morning with us. Thanks so much.
You bet.
If you liked that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.